Live. Welcome.
Welcome,
And
ladies and
Ron will
gents.
be on in a minute, according to his chat.
I see that. Excellent.
All right.
Well, hello,
Well,
ladies and
you guys are
gentlemen.
the stars of the show. I'll be right back.
How's it going? Are we live? Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So this is session 12 of the 2025 mentorship program. Today, we will be hitting the last of our actual chapters with the sort of focused discussion. The next two sessions that we have, you guys probably want to make sure you hit or try to hit it live because that is when we will be talking a lot about testing. We'll be doing practice test questions, well, almost all the time of those two, and then answering questions as we go along doing that. We will be using CSecure for that. We will not be using the chat GPT that we've been using up to this point. But we had two chapters, what, 20 and 21 on this one, or then so we got Jake and John were handling those ones for the recording. So let's start in the first one here, which was, yeah, it was 20. So Jake, I think that was you. Any takeaways?
That
Actually,
was
John did
actually
20.
me.
I did 21.
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry, I apologize. I had him backwards.
Uh,
Good job.
no worries. I mean, top chapter 20, I tried to cover everything in the chapter from the book. That's the kind of person that I am. Hopefully people, got some good use and information out of that. Um, I mean, I with putting it all out on the table, and there being things in there that are kind of like almost like foot stomped, that I feel like, man, I feel like I've said that two or three times, and I'm like, I've almost thought about going back and revising my script. But yeah, I don't have anything additional to add. I'd love it. Any questions that people may have, things that may have come across confusing, or um, questions that they have.
I got something for you, John. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Ron. Hello.
Hello. Hope everyone's having an awesome week. Sorry, I did not actually watch through all of your training. How much did you get into the different resources available at OWASP?
Not much. There was a couple of mentions of OWASP, and I think even a link to some stuff out on OWASP.
Do you mind if I give a couple minute about OWASP and a few other resources because it's
Absolutely.
fundamental for application security of all types, whether it's web, mobile.
I
I put
absolutely
it
would
in the
not mind. I
chat.
would appreciate it. Please do.
Certainly. So OWASP been around for a couple of decades. So they have really long-standing credibility. They have chapters throughout the world. So it's a worldwide recognized organization. If you go to their website and look at under projects, numerous projects, including under AI, where you can share about both Gen AI, their AI exchange. The number one thing to look at OWASP, and this will fit into when Jake is talking about attacks in a little bit, and I'm pulling up, going back to the YouTube chat, OWASP top 10. What is the OWASP top 10? Well, the top 10 web types of vulnerabilities. Again, been around for a long time, most recently updated
Oh,
this year, explaining the different types of risks. Oh, project status is at 2024. It's supposed to be announced in the first half of 2025. Oops, they missed that. Okay, but even if you're looking at the 2021 version, it still applies. What are the top ways apps get broken? Access control. So this ties back to when we're talking about identity and access. Crypto, if you're not protecting your keys. Injection type of attacks, where we're talking SQL injection, LDAP injection, insecure design. You didn't build it with security in mind. Security misconfiguration. You didn't use a baseline like CIS benchmarks or STIGs, not checking for vulnerabilities. And again, IAM, identity authentication. Software and data integrity. Basically, who can change the data and who can change the applications. This ties into that CI/CD pipeline and DevSecOps. You should not allow developers into production. Sorry, any devs out there. It's protect yourself, really. You want to protect your production. Only certain folks should be allowed in it. Security logging, basically, do you have a SIM in place to capture your logs? And then it gets into the different types of request forgeries. What I like about the OWASP Top 10, it'll not only show you how it can be exploited, but also how to fix it. And it's actually information for the coders out there. And I'm curious for folks here on YouTube, how many of you are coders? And I know we have 65 watching at this moment. If you are, this will be your strength. Numerous other tools they have as well. In the chapter, it talks about maturity models, the capability maturity model, the 5 different levels. Yes, you have to know this because I'm literally doing it today. Everything from initial, where basically it's chaos, to optimized, level 5. Very few organizations should be level 5. It's very expensive. Try to shoot for about a level 3. The book also talks about SAM's software assurance maturity model. I can put that in chat. Can you tell I did my homework before this, which is another really good resource about how do we assure software security. Another similar one is called the Build Security In maturity model, been around since 2006. Basically, it was determined we need to do what's called shift left in the software development lifecycle. What does that mean? Oh, yeah. Hey, Evan, we're going to go live tomorrow. Do you think we should do some security testing?
No, man.
No. And that's the wrong question. Yeah. You should think about security early in the process. What you want to do is build your security champions.
Don't do development like I do development.
And how do you do development?
Well, I'm a hacker, not a developer. The difference is I break code mostly, but developing code, formally the way, going through OWASP and software development life cycles and secure software development life cycles, it's critical. I can certainly evaluate them. I wouldn't be your guy to set it up. I'm just too ADHD.
I'm with you.
That sounds like use case testing, which is covered in chapter 20.
Yep. I'm definitely really good for QA.
John, what is use case testing for those who are not familiar?
Oh gosh, man, I get so twisted up on that. Honestly, like when I was going through this book, I was like, man, these different things. I was like, I really am glad that I was, covering this chapter. But I believe use case testing is where you're seeing if it does what it's supposed to do. Because there's user acceptance testing, and then there's like 3 or 4 of them, and I get a little mixed up on them.
Well, use case testing is usually really predictable. You're looking for a specific outcome from a specific input. So did it do specifically what I asked it to do in specific use cases? So the good thing about use case testing is you know what to expect on the back end when you're running the test. And if it deviates from that, there's usually something wrong. Like I'm coding right now, stuff for Project Broken Mirror, and I'm running a test, and I know specifically what I'm looking for from this test. And if it doesn't give me what I want from this test, that's my use case. I'm looking for this output.
It's checking the
if I
process
don't get it, then it
as
failed.
well. You want to be careful though, is that you're not establishing the tests artificially to where you get the output, but it's not based on real life. So it's use case, consider it like scenarios or even like tabletop exercises. But with use cases, you want to look at different types of personas. So different types of users of your application, whether it's the end user who will do silly things, they will let their cat sit on the keyboard, causing an accidental buffer overflow, on an input field. That's just a silly way to think about it, but just understanding how the application will be used, abused, and misused. So this gets into that error checking as well. Have you ever been on a website or application and you get an error message?
Mm-hmm. All the websites I create.
Someone else is. Always happens, and it'll tell you exactly the version they are running. Cringe. Which is way more information than should be provided. those are other types of use cases. So it's a good way to specify rather than trying to test every type of possibility. It's focusing on what are the most common uses for that application.
Ron, could you talk about static and dynamic testing, code testing, as well as, if you have the code or not, which I believe that's the difference kind of between the static, let my layman understand, not a coder, is reviewing the code line by line. And then dynamic is, where you have the code. I mean, I'm sorry, actually, I'm gonna let you talk about that.
No worries. You got it basically right, John. Static, yes, you're actually looking at the code and it's automated type of a testing. So many programs now have hundreds of thousands, millions of lines of code. It's impossible for humans to go through it all. So there are specific tools you can run that will actually look for known type of vulnerabilities within the code, usually types of procedural calls, coding techniques that'll be able to look.
In static code testing, the code's not running.
Right. Yep.
Dynamic, you're testing the code, running code.
Yep. So dynamic, exactly, because you won't be able to check for the runtime errors with the static. So what should you use? Both. How often should you use them? Almost continually now. The joke I made earlier was don't wait until you're about ready to go into production and you can't fix the stuff. You want, as part of your processes, whether you're using Agile or even the really old waterfall, have that security testing, again, using both. There's something also known as a SCA, software composition analysis. It's kind of the combination of the two. There's a IAST, interactive application security testing, kind of another hybrid form of dynamic, all very common to be used as part of the software development lifecycle today, but you need to make sure your developers are part of the solution. Pause to see. I'm saying if you're using any particular tools, put them in chat.
Well, nowadays, the average application is calling, I don't know how many open source libraries, you know what I mean? And that's a huge problem. So your code might be tight, but you're calling libraries that they may not be tight. So you may have.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a huge issue, so that's why, you have the software bill of materials, the SBM.
Mm-hmm.
And the software bill of materials is meant to be like, okay, my code is right here, but I'm calling, 20, 30 different open source libraries. And so that software bill of materials should list those libraries so you can go test those as well, make sure that those are up to date. There's so many hacks
Yes.
of open source libraries. Your code's tight, but you're calling
what
code that's
is
not.
this SBOM thing we've heard about? Now there's AI bombs and other types. And yes, they've heard all of the jokes about it. I put it in chat, the CISSP website. Follow Dr. Alan Friedman. He's the godfather of SBOM. The idea, as you're building software, just like if you're buying an appliance, you'll get that user manual associated with it that'll tell you what are the different components. And if one part goes wrong, you can know how to replace it. That's the idea with SBOMs. Basically, when you're pulling code from other outside sources, you'll have that inventory of what it is, what it does, its version controls, what it may call as well. So you do need to know that for the IRL test in real life when it will come up.
Could you also talk about scaled agile frameworks, aka SAFe?
Been a while since I've looked at that. Give me a moment. Like anything in this book, it's like you pull it up and you look at it. The whole idea with Agile is that you're partnering with the developers, with your business counterparts, and everyone works together, and it's more of that continual testing, which is actually what we're looking to do as far as risk management. No longer is it the annual security assessment and annual pen test, which means you can go 360 days with vulnerabilities and not know of them. So it's just integrating throughout. And I don't know if others have thoughts about safe. I could see it earlier when I read through.
Yeah, I actually don't know much about that.
I think it's just more of a newer methodology, but it's based on the older principles. And forgive me while I look down while I'm trying to find it in the book.
Yeah, the biggest thing with code is like, I mean, complexity is the worst enemy of security, right? You look at so much code now and it's like, holy crap, you're trying to insert. I mean, there's like, back in speaking as an old timer, I mean, you'd have code that would do specific things, right? And it was very focused on the specific things that I need done. But with the way development has emerged over the years, it's like you have to come out with a new release every quarter, you know, a new function, a new feature, a new something, right? Otherwise, you don't make money, right? Because people want the new stuff. And so you see code today where they just keep adding more and more and more complexity. And I think, I don't know what the average is today, but it's probably somewhere between 6 to 8 errors per 1,000 lines of code, which is called a KLOC, is what finds its way into what a consumer uses, right? And so you compound the errors when you have, you know, if you had 1,000 lines of code versus a few million lines of code. You know, it's crazy. Like my Ford truck that I bought last year has 250 million lines of code. I mean,
Nothing will break there.
hardware doesn't do anything unless there's software to tell it what to do. Right. But it's just crazy. Like, okay, so if I do the math, 250 million lines of code and there's 6 to 8 errors per 1,000 lines of code, how many errors are in my Ford truck that I drive every day? You know,
how many make a difference?
It's nuts. Well, some will make a difference, and some of them are just functional errors, but you know, some of them are, you know, security vulnerabilities. You know, that's, you know, in the testing and the QA, you try to cover the use cases that you know, they're the most common, the most impactful, the most problematic, but you're always going to miss the fringe things. And the way code, you know, the way we write code today, it's like there's so many what's the word, like functions where there's calls to other things that it's hard to follow those lines. So I mean, using automation in your static code testing is like super important to follow through all these branches of everything that your code's calling everywhere. Because as a hacker type, you may find a small vulnerability that seems like the fringe vulnerability, but as you continue to drive deeper into that vulnerability, you find yourself into core functionality, which is like, oh shit. And it's crazy because like the same, if you look at like OWASP, you look at their top 10, it hasn't changed much over the years, right? SQL injection is still a big damn problem. Buffer overflows are still a big damn problem. And the thing from a software development standpoint, those are really easy to avoid. They're just simple bounds checking. You know, it's like, how could we still be writing code with this shit? But, you know, we are.
Just moving fast, breaking things, that thought process, but not having those checks and balances with the code. And again, having the discipline. To get back to your question, John, regarding those scaled agile frameworks, 4 different types. Essential, this is more traditional agile, you know, again, building security in early, understanding those requirements and tying in security to the user experience as well. You can lock things down too much, which means folks will find ways around it, or it actually harms functionality. So it's level setting the amount of security. There's the large, which brings together, they have what's called agile release trains. Where I see there's a potential for questions on an exam is just understanding generality in terms of these differences. Portfolio is taking into account more of those specific use cases or procedures. Breaking down, so how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Who the hell would eat an elephant?
It might be tasty. It tastes like chicken.
There you go.
No shit. I'm gonna have to try it.
Yeah, how do you eat a cow? Cows are also pretty big. You know, again, you break it up into the smaller components, and that's really a lot of the fundamental idea behind SAFE. And then full doing essential, large, and portfolio. So, and it really, if you look at the principles, they've been around for almost as long as Evan, as far as economic
Come on.
view, systems thinking, looking at the value, decision making. So, yeah, it's just another form that you can use with your development life cycle.
And the key concept in the book that I threw on the slide was that every task traces to a business goal. Story to feature, to capability to epic.
We're supposed to know about the business. I'm in cybersecurity. Just kidding. I was hoping that would piss off Evan.
That's a whole nother ball of wax because people have an addiction to technology.
Yes.
They buy shit and it's like, why do you actually need this?
It's cool.
And I think us as security people, it's challenging that in the right way. Right. We should have a purpose behind every piece of software we have running in the environment. We don't buy it just because it looks cool.
You mean like AI? We
Right.
need the AI to solve this problem. What's the problem? We don't have AI.
Right.
Yes, circular thinking. So one of the common challenges, I'm going to shift us a little bit, we're seeing, especially now, as components are speaking to each other through APIs, is I do encourage all y'all, and I was in Texas earlier this week, so I can say all y'all now.
All y'all.
Understanding API security. It really is a concern, particularly as we're using external LLMs, as we're looking at, MCP. That's the new protocol, kind of like the USB-C, but for procedural calls, for communications across the internet. And MCP is not something in the book, something really new, but what we're finding is trying to get the integration between different types of programs. It's really helping to solve some of those challenges. Model Context Protocol, there we go. And you can go to modelcontextprotocol.io to learn more about it. You can highly
I had a question about
recommend
APIs.
Yes.
Because as I was reading through it, it kind of seemed to me like that's how bots work on like social media bots. They're going out, they're liking things, they're making connections. That's correct.
Yes. Bots are one attack vector we're seeing through APIs. Basically, when you just allow them open, who do you allow to connect with you? Which could be interpreted in multiple ways, but who can call your API and what APIs are you calling? So the question I'll often ask my clients is, now, do you have an API inventory? I think I remember someone really wise saying we need an inventory of stuff to include software. Well, now we need to take it down a level to even our APIs.
Now you're going and sounding all responsible and stuff. Why would we do that?
I know, right? I got to stop that. So I threw in chat again from OWASP, free, if y'all like free. They have their API security top 10 for 2023, still applies today, repeats a lot of their other top 10. But this gets to object level. So authorization, what permissions? And we're seeing this with AI. AI will often take the permissions of the user, but if that user has way more permissions than they should, then that could potentially allow that AI engine to have access to things that it shouldn't. So this is why establishing identity access management, broken authentication, what are you doing with your API keys, protecting those? Resource consumption, function level authorization. So it's object level, function level. So the difference is object is like a specific, think about object-oriented programming, specific asset, as opposed to function level, it's the verb. What are you doing with that asset? And the different types of forgeries. Can I forge a certificate? So this ties back into crypto. So if you read through this, it's very similar to the others, but again, something we are working towards, not only as part of actually a lot more than just certification, but part of my day job, helping clients secure their APIs. Pausing to see other questions. Some of these we can talk about forever. What I did find is this book is lacking on a lot of this material, which is why I'm kind of jumping in and throwing a lot of others. Wait, what's that? I just heard Evan ask a question. He just
I didn't
asked,
ask a
hey,
question.
Ron, what book should I read to learn more about application security? Why, Evan, that is a wonderful question. I
Yeah.
recommend two books by the same author, and she's absolutely fantastic. One is called Alice and Bob, Learn Application Security. I'll throw the link in chat because my
It's
camera
blurring
is
out
not.
if you put it too close for some
I
reason.
know. Well, it's just I have the filter on because I don't want you to see my messy office. And then brand new for 2025, Alice and Bob, Secure Coding. I'll throw the link in chat. That'll be easier for y'all to find. She was a lead developer for Microsoft for a number of years, and now she's independent. You can often see her speak, watch her YouTube channel. Again, she's just super knowledgeable. So, and you beat me to it.
Do people still read?
Does anyone still read? I recommend picking them up. You put them under your pillow and it just sinks in while you're sleeping, Evan. But this will get into even what Jake's going to talk about, some of the different types of attacks. Buffer, stack, string,
attacks.
integer overflows, memory management. We're talking about computer memory. I know memory management for us who are over 50 may be a different problem. Memory leaks. So check those out as resources. Get outside of this book, because this is really what ISC2 is looking for when you're taking the CISSP exam, is how well do you apply these concepts? So what is this DevSecOps thing?
That is the combination of development, security, and operations, bringing those people together so they are not throwing things over the fence and they're actually working together.
Why would they want to work together?
No, nobody wants to work with security people. Come on. It's crazy that it took so long for us to come up with that.
True.
You know what I mean? But yeah, it's an integration of those three things, which is critical.
So it's tying it into the business. So that's the ops side. Dev. This was actually my master's thesis a long time ago, because I would see development in one side of the building, operations in the other side, and they would never speak. And then we wonder why things never worked.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even talk about security back then. I was saying we need to incorporate more functionality and user testing throughout the SDLC just to make sure we're meeting user requirements and it's not developers saying, well, here's what I'm giving you and you're going to like it. Tying it in, because one thing you want to make sure with security is that it's the easy path. You want it to be the path most people walk, and you want to make security as invisible as possible. That's kind of the trick with a lot of this.
I was talking to Jacob, before we started, one of the companies that I worked for way back when was Jask Software, and we made Paint Shop Pro. And this was back in the .com days. And this is why DevSecOps, just like the fact that we had to like formalize it, that it wasn't just common sense for people. It kind of like, well, because I remember when it first came out, DevSecOps, I was like, the hell is this? It's like, oh, when development works together with security, when it works together with operations. I was like, who the hell is developing software without that? I mean, I was like, what the hell? Because at Jask Software, we made Paint Shop Pro, and we were so tightly integrated as a team. I was on the security, and network side, and we were friends with the developers. We knew what was going on, and we worked on a lot of projects together. So it's good to see that, I guess for the people that weren't doing it, there's no other way you can do development at any scale without integrating security and operations.
Exactly. How many of you have a GitHub page and have learned how to use GitHub for commits and everything?
I have multiple GitHubs.
Yeah.
Do you want to commit to some of my shit?
I don't know if I'm in the commitment type. That's a
I
different
know.
story.
Yeah, no doubt.
Actually, I was just looking up what GitHub has to say. I do recommend if you're new to this area, for those learners on YouTube or Discord, learn about it through GitHub. I was able to teach myself a lot about it. And of course, I'm trying to find their article about it, and I got a 404. So I found another article from GitHub about DevSecOps. On
And
that
one of the
in
things that
chat.
people don't realize about GitHub is you don't have to use it. I mean, you don't have to be a developer to use GitHub.
No, no.
There's tons of really cool stuff that you can do with GitHub. It's really about version control and collaboration on things together.
No.
So you can write documents, you can write books. I mean, you can just do project management with GitHub is, kind of a version control piece to it all. So I would, if you're in the tech side of security and you don't know GitHub, I would highly recommend you learn it. There's some good, cheap, and free classes that you can take to learn how GitHub works. You'd first want to learn how Git works.
Yes.
And work with it, locally on your system. And then, yeah, it's a great tool. Linus Torvalds made that.
Yeah. And now it's owned by Microsoft, but Microsoft actually allowed them to stay pretty independent.
I know. I was surprised that they didn't totally screw that up when they purchased it.
Right. With it too, version control is a continual challenge, even within document management. So yes, understanding that when you create a GitHub page, almost required to create a README, which is really old. I've been doing READMEs for 50, 40 years. But it's something as silly as that. It's just something that explains what is this? Who created it? When it was created? How many things do you find on the internet and you don't know how old they are or who really originated it? And is it just a copy of a copy? Yeah. This provides that metadata behind the information, whether it's code or documents.
Yeah. And GitHub is a great place too, for people trying to get into this industry or people who want to sort of create a repository of the projects they've worked on in the past and everything. Because I've encouraged a lot of people who I know, have Git repositories with some pretty cool stuff on it, and they're looking for jobs. I'm like, just tell people about your GitHub repository. Point them in that direction, and then they can see. Because that's the one thing that everybody's asking. It's not just what do you know, but what can you actually do? And when you have a GitHub with all your projects and things that you've worked on, and people can see how you work, that's pretty cool.
Exactly. Yeah, that it's like having a blog or a podcast as well. This helps show those hiring managers, something outside of book knowledge and improving it.
I found another really cool tool. I don't know if have you ever heard of ClickUp? I'm totally off top again. ClickUp, yeah. It's I started using it with some of because I have a bunch of like little projects with like developer friends that we're working on and stuff. And ClickUp is kind of a cool tool, and it integrates with GitHub on the back end, where you can have like tasking, scheduling. The pieces that are missing from GitHub, you can use ClickUp on that front end, and then as you make changes, you can integrate and push to GitHub if you want. Just a pro tip. It's a fun.
Yeah,
it's a fun tool.
Get out and play, and that's really a great learning experience, is trying out these different apps to understand how they work. So this way, again, it's not just studying from a book and what exam question, it's applying it, which will help
for sure.
In so many areas. Let's see, what else do we need to know from this chapter, John? What about databases? What's a database and why do we care?
Oh my
And what's the
gosh,
difference between a database and a data warehouse and a data lake?
You are really, I have no clue. I'm going to phone a friend.
Bring your swimsuit.
Yeah.
Bring your swimsuit if you're going into a data lake.
Data lake, data oceans. So
If you
old-fashioned
want to go deep in the
database.
data lake, learn how to scuba dive, brother.
Yes, exactly. So database is basically just the repository of data, traditional types being either relational, and that's where the concept of the different types of keys. So a key basically is just how do you identify specific data elements? It's usually a unique identifier, particularly that primary key. I'm going back many years. And it's a way to, how do we relate different types of data? For example, let's just say you have your database of our students here, and then we have a database of who has passed the CISSP exam. Will have one key to be able to talk between them. And this way you can keep actually a lot of the information independent. This way you can have access to one repository and not the other, using those keys to talk in between. One thing for security I will call out, and I don't see in the book, let's get some transactions, we'll talk about something known as TDE, Transparent Data Encryption. Do your database administrators need to be able to see all of the data? Nope. They keep the lights on. They don't need to see the data nor change the data. So the idea, initiated by Oracle and many others way back in the day, basically automatically encrypting databases. So this way you need to have the decryption key in order to be able to view the information. And you may even have, consider CIA here associated with databases. See this all the time with data. Confidentiality may be low, but integrity may be high. What do I mean by that? You don't care who can see your data, but you only want to make sure Evan can change your data, because we all trust Evan. So separating those levels of permissions, critical within a database.
How are database partitioned?
It's usually based on those different keys, and it's been years since I've worked on databases. Based on use cases, sometimes also based on the different types of applications. Some applications have their own back-end database that will be used.
Yeah, the book talked about how using database partitioning, it mitigates aggregation and inference attacks, which are very similar and kind of, can easily confuse them. But when I was reading about it, I'm like, I wonder if it's a logical thing, kind of like how you partition VLANs or how you would partition a hard drive.
It is. Yeah. You take a table and you break it into smaller, manageable chunks, basically. And you can get, it's improved performance, better scalability, easier to manage in some cases. Sometimes you do it for availability purposes, but you can get pretty deep in partitioning because there's horizontal partitioning. So if you look at like a relational database, horizontal partitioning would be, breaking down large tables with a whole bunch of records in it into separate chunks. And then you've got vertical partitioning, which is like, think of a whole bunch of rows, right? And breaking down those rows into different chunks. But yeah, you can do it. It's not really done as much for security purposes as people might think. It's really done more for data handling, just improve performance and shit like that, because your queries then are done on partitions as opposed to the entire tables. So usually, you get returns quicker and stuff like that.
So two quick thoughts. One, with AI, we are seeing a lot more threat associated with the aggregate and inference, mainly because it will often pull information from multiple repositories that normally wouldn't allow for that aggregated data. Now you can do a search and just, a regular prompt and accidentally pull very sensitive data, especially since most organizations do a poor job of data classification and labeling. So, or by itself, a data element may not be sensitive. Evan's first name, everyone knows Evan's first name. It's not sensitive, but if I combine that, with that aggregate, I can develop that PII profile and then begin to infer that he lives in Mexico somewhere. Reportedly, I've not yet confirmed that fact.
Oh, it's here. I'm here. Come visit me.
The idea. And of course, I knew I was going to forget my second thought. Oh, so do I need to know SQL? And how is it SQL or Squeal? SQL thing.
You need to know about generally SQL, I would think, like NoSQL and just kind of the different uses of it, maybe.
So someone put in chat before, who's using Splunk? To do a query on Splunk, guess what you use? SQL.
Structured query language.
Yeah. So
But you
I
don't need
would
to speak the
recommend.
language for the test, but you will need to know the basics and what it's for.
Right. I would know very basic commands, and it's like riding a bike. It's been a number of years since I played with it, but it's basically understanding, how to create that query, and how to pull that information. Now, keep in
I
mind,
agree with
Splunk is really
Carrie.
just
It's
a big
SQL.
database.
It's not. It's SQL.
Yeah. I was just,
That's correct.
oh, we had to check. How do you really say it? Like, is it Linux or Linux? So,
Yeah, that's a good point too. I was actually, that's why I brought up that I was surprised that Linus Torvalds had written Git. I didn't know that until like a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. Somebody mentioned it to me. I was like, no shit. So I looked it up and I'm like, damn, he did, because he got tired of all the other code management platforms and things, programs that were out there. So he just wrote his own. Man, that's some sweet ass skill.
So someone put a question in chat. How often do you scan databases for vulnerabilities? Which is a good question. Does it make a difference whether it's a database or anything else? No. Depends on the criticality of the information stored within the database. Depends on the visibility of it. Sometimes it's depending on the compliance requirements. So the idea,
yeah, you have to put that question into context. I mean, also if the devs and database administrators, if you're making, if it's a dynamic kind of code environment where you're making changes regularly, I mean, I would test a database anytime you made a change to the database, and what specific changes would dictate a database testing scenario, right? I mean, you need to get that functional with it. Because you should ideally be testing, doing vulnerability testing, vulnerability scanning on every code promotion into production.
So
but
it's not when
sometimes if you have a really dynamic, if you have a really dynamic environment, that might be cost prohibitive. It might be performance prohibitive. So, in context, it's like, all right, well, maybe these particular functions, if it changed these 10 things, then you got to test. So in reality, all those, questions of how long you should, how often should you vulnerability scan? How often should you test? It's all got to be put into context.
How does this fit with CI/CD pipelines to automate integrating code changes? If we're doing CI/CD, how do we ensure that we're testing as it should be? Because it's really automating the whole DevSecOps process. Curious for others' thoughts on that.
I think you should automate everything that doesn't require discernment and is a repeatable process.
Exactly. And that's the idea. Understanding the code changes, putting the responsibility back, and this actually gets back to that safe question from a little bit ago. Responsibility on those who are making the changes, making sure they are documenting their changes. Oh, that's radical. Documentation is a 4-letter word for developers. You want me to put
There's a great
comments
place
in
to
my
use
code?
AI. I've been using AI to document my code, and it actually does a really good job at that, because it's all logical. You just follow the code, and I just want documentation. AI does great for documenting code.
And
If you don't
can
like
actually,
documenting shit.
yeah, exactly. And that's a great use case for using AI. And automating as you are going through your CI/CD pipeline, have the testing be a part of it, where it'll only raise an alert if it's a known vulnerability, or there's a potential threat associated with it. You can establish those parameters. So this way, it's not relying on humans to test, because humans are not very reliable sometimes. I do recommend, though, for folks who are studying this stuff, to get out of the book again and learn about CI/CD pipeline, particularly when working with cloud resources. We're seeing that all the time. This even gets into automating that software asset inventory. Someone's got this question during assessment. As long as you can show what your software assets are, even within, the cloud environment, as we're moving more towards, what's the word I'm thinking of? Where you can build and tear down and using serverless more and more, but environments, it's not like the old days where you have a server and it's there forever. You establish a new instance, you use it, and then it goes away. Reduces compute resources, reduces the attack surface. If it's only available for a very short period of time, you have to be able to have that timing frequency. I don't know. Other thoughts regarding CI/CD?
Quick question. Was there anything in the book about vibe coding?
Negative.
Because that's
I
something
think
that's
that's a
starting
little
to
too new.
pop up on my radar as a security guy more and more.
Does it involve EDM?
No, it's vibe coding is where, people with no code experience can go and use an AI to just develop and write code for you. There's a lot of different platforms now that are emerging, but it's, in my opinion, it's dangerous because you're writing code that you don't know what it's doing. In the right hands, like using AI to assist for an experienced developer is amazing. They can, it accelerates their, and it improves the quality of their code. But for, somebody who doesn't know how to code, using vibe coding and then putting things into production, that's scary as shit. So even though it's not in the book, as a practitioner, get familiar with it.
I just read an article that said that companies that hired or fired people coders and were turning to AI code are now having to rehire those folks to come back and fix this crappy code that AI has been writing.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
If only there was somebody that would have told them that ahead of time.
I know.
It's like, son of a bitch. But that's the thing. And the reason why people, I think, rush so fast to AI and to new features and everything like that is they think it's a competitive advantage. They think it's going to make them more money. And even on the software development side, right, it's driven by money. Code developers are usually under a lot of pressure to get code out the door as quickly as possible. So sometimes you skip a step. Sometimes there are vulnerabilities that you normally wouldn't go out the door with, but we haven't released something this quarter. The shareholders are all up in my ass about it. Let's release it and patch it later. Those are all decisions that actually happen all the time. And they're behind closed doors. And sadly, security folks, we have to deal with that.
So 2 comments from chat. One, Gigo, garbage in, garbage out. The other being, we asked ChatGPT if it was a good idea, and it said yes. So we have our answer.
Well, even thinking about ChatGPT, the logic behind ChatGPT is to get you to keep coming back, right? It's a user experience, and so you wouldn't want people wouldn't come back. People without discernment wouldn't come back to an AI that didn't agree with them regularly. You know what I mean? So there's like this, yeah, that's a great idea, but is it? I mean, ChatGPT and none of the AIs for a long, long time have any conscience, any empathy. So it's just math. That's it. And, sadly, I think a lot of people are falling for that right now.
Till they realize, yes. So I'm just checking the YouTube chat, see if there was other questions. Understanding where there's testing. It's just following that process. Too often, when you just allow people to create their own, they don't understand the power of process and they skip the process. And then this creates undesirable effects. But there's a reason why we've established these. Again, most of the problems I see within organizations is not due to the technology, it's the people and process they have not defined. And particularly, the book won't talk about it, but as we're seeing more agentic, or someone who I work with calls it agent-ish, because it's not really creating the agents, but it's creating the automation. But before you can automate something, you have to understand what that process is. And most people are lazy to figure out what the process is, understanding where the data flows, which requires.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, a pro tip is do it manually 5, 10 times until you dial it in and then automate it.
Like
You
using
know,
a
you
calculator?
don't start with automation.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Reason why we couldn't use calculators in grade school. I had to do math the old-fashioned way.
Right.
I don't know if that's still the case.
Well,
What
one of the
else do
things
we
that's
need?
so important for security is like intimate understanding of how things work. And if you've gone through the process of building an automation, building a sequence, building a method, building a function, when you've done it manually and you've been in it, it makes it so much easier for you to secure it.
Yes.
You know, as opposed to like, oh, we just created some damn automation, and you're like, well, how does it work?
Mhm.
I don't know. You just click this, and this comes out.
It's like
Shit.
baking a cake, though. You have to make sure you're putting in the right ingredients, you're following the steps. And this way, you don't need to actually test the output as much if you've tested the process. And that's actually how they do food manufacturing, believe it or not. They don't go and put their finger in every pot pie, and test and take a bite out of each pot pie or each Slim Jim or name your food choice. It's dinner time. So they
Well, it's
look at
funny
what
how
is the
relevant this is
process.
to what I'm doing right now because I'm working on, attack surface management things, and I've done all this stuff manually before.
Mhm.
And so you just take these manual things that I've already done before, like, subdomain enumeration, from a domain. I've done that millions of times. So writing a script to accomplish that is really straightforward, and I know exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Those are places where you use automation, in my opinion.
All right, so we've been going for 53, 4 minutes. What else do we need to know about software development?
Nothing. You're good to go. Find yourself an
Okay,
AI and start writing code. Go for it.
there you go. Yep.
But I do suggest, like, there's I'd already been developing for a while, but there was I found a course on Udemy. I think it was Udemy. It's 100 days of code.
Mhm.
It's written, I can't remember her name. I have to look that up. But I took that course because I was like, before I'm going to suggest it to somebody, I want to take it and try it. It was awesome. And it was about learning Python, and every day you wrote a program, you wrote an application that did a function, did something for you. And when you did it at the end of the 100 days, even if you had like no experience, at the end of that 100 days, you're a pretty damn good developer. I mean, if you were paying attention, so
It's just
I highly suggest that
repetitive
one if
skill
you.
building over time, small bites. So I through
Yeah.
code.org, I mean, many school systems here in the US now require students to take different types of coding courses, which I think is really good because it teaches the logic behind it. Keep in mind,
Mhm.
it comes back to understanding the logic. Hang out in Python. I've had some job
Oh, there it is.
interviews where they required me to know Python.
100 days of code. That's what it is. 100 days of code, and it's that was her name. The Complete Python Pro Boot Camp. Dr. Angela Yu.
Yeah. And someone put in the chat about if you're doing a capture the flag, you
Yeah,
will have to code. So
that was one of the best because I've taken a lot of coding classes just to see what they were, over the years, and that one. That one was awesome.
cool. So I recommend we flip this now and talk about malicious code and application attacks. And poor Jake hasn't been able to get a word in edgewise. Being us old guys.
Oh, good. Chapter starts with the different types of malicious code or different types of attacks. You're definitely going to get a question on like what's the difference between a virus and a worm. Virus requires user action to propagate. A worm's automatic. What else does it go into? Viruses, file infector viruses, different types
I
of
have a saying
executable.
for that. Viruses embed, worms spread.
It's a good saying.
Yeah.
File infector viruses, we got macro viruses, stuff that happens in like Visual Basic for Word or PowerPoint. Service injection viruses, probably maybe more so a Windows attack surface, but some kind of virus takes control over a system service and gains the permissions associated with that. Goes into different types of viruses, multipartite, stealth, polymorphic, encrypted, different ways of remaining undetected. So multipartite, especially dangerous, might have different places of infection, be able to reinfect after you clear out one different part of it. Polymorphic viruses that change. A lot of the detection now, I know in my day-to-day, is just hash-based. If the hash changes every time, pretty difficult to track that same bad actor across all your systems. Kind of in the same vein with encrypted viruses, your EDR or endpoint protection can't scan it since it's encrypted, and the first step of executing that virus is decrypting it.
So if I can, couple of quick tangents. Well, one, heuristic versus definitions with EDR, so endpoint detection and response, formerly known as antivirus. It's not just about viruses anymore. It's about how do we protect endpoints against all these different types of attacks. So so often these are the old antivirus would have those definitions and it would look for those specific hash values for malicious software. But the bad guys have gotten really smart and they continually updating, particularly now with AI, they can change the hash value by just changing one period, one little element within their code, and AV then needs to send new definitions. So what are some of the new ways that our antivirus or EDR, sometimes also known as MDR, managed detection response, is using to be able to find malware?
So looking beyond the signature, the file name, the publisher, that kind of tacit data you can look at, and looking at what it's doing. What kind of links are in here? What processes is it accessing? Is it trying to elevate itself? Looking at all of those things in conjunction and trying to figure out if this is something malicious. And I actually dealt with this week. HR sent out a new benefits package PDF. And believe it or not, before the download was complete, when it was in that like partial CR download in Chrome, there was a heuristic detection. So what's the problem with that? The hash is changing every time since the partial download. So that was part of my fun this week. Still not sure what exactly was triggering it, but was coming up as a heuristic detection.
So what I'm hearing is that HR is a virus. Anyway, we won't go there.
I didn't say it.
You didn't, I did. No, but with that, it's just being aware because it could be someone trying to fabricate or an insider threat.
Right. And even like take PowerShell as an example. PowerShell can be completely benign or it can be used to do all sorts of things. You got to look at how it's being used, not necessarily what.
Exactly. Which is actually a great point for those on Windows. We do recommend learning a touch of PowerShell. Some organizations may disable PowerShell. Actually, it was with one organization, they disabled you from using a command prompt, but you could still use PowerShell. Doing a facepalm for those who couldn't tell, where you can do everything with PowerShell that you can with the command prompt and a lot more. So it's actually a very good tool. I've been using it for a number of years. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, great discussion.
Another thing I saw in the book was these advanced persistent threats. Did you see there was a recent story? They're trying to come up with a unified naming convention associated with it. I'm going to throw this in chat because I just stumbled on this and I find this fascinating. How did they come up with all of these weird names? Well, I put in chat, and keep in mind, we are on a little bit of a time lag. the Microsoft site about how they do the naming, such as if it's for Russia, they'll call it Blizzard. If it's China, it's Typhoon. So depending on where it's originating from. But the idea of different organizations will come up with different names for really the same threat actor. Like Google, I think, calls it like APT, and then with a number. So it's just, again, being familiar. This is kind of the fascinating part of cybersecurity. And it even gets into other names associated with it. So if you go to this Microsoft site. So what else do we need to know about APTs? Nothing to worry about anymore, right?
Sorry.
No, man,
Usually, well, I call it the opposite of the book calls them script kiddies, which is somebody that would be like super low tech, low effort, just looking for publicly available, backdoors or vulnerabilities. ATP is going to be somebody with significant backing. I think, like in the resource you just sent, Ron, nations or states or some type of government, right? Somebody with a lot of backing that really wants in or wants something. Gonna know those 0 days, exploit those, make sure that their exploits are persistent, not easily detected, not easily remediated.
Cool. A lot of these are, I'm almost surprised they saved this chapter to the very end, but kind of encouraging to those who are sticking through it, because this is really the fun part, understanding the different types of viruses, logic bombs, again, associating it with insider threat as much as the external.
Yeah,
So,
just to expand on that, a logic bomb, something that sits and waits for a condition before it acts. So that could be, I think, like the example they use as an insider threat example would be when a specific user account is disabled or deleted. Maybe, the vengeful system administrator wants to take the company down if they get fired. Or I think there's another one they mentioned that correlates with the ATPs. It was something looking for a specific Siemens microcontroller that spun nuclear refining centrifuges, right? Just anything that's looking for a specific criterion or criteria before it executes its payload.
And sometimes, and this is why it ties back to the previous chapter, do you know what your developers are adding to code? They may be putting in error checks that they forget that they are there, putting in alternate means of accessing the application, again, just to make their own lives easier, forgetting that it was pushed to production. So it's not always malicious. We see these, an accidental Trojan horse.
A quick personal story. A long time ago at a company that I worked with, they had a programmer on staff for their financial system, which is running off an old, I think it was an AS400 IBM mainframe. And they quite literally written into the code, which he showed some of us, was he had something written to the code where if he did not change that on a regular basis, it would shut down the system and you could not use the system. And it was job protection for him, which if he would actually use it or not, I don't know. But like if he would have actually let it do it, but it was actually written in there. So that was my first IT job. So it was a very long time ago, but it was there and he had done it.
I miss my AS400. My last job had one. That was always fun to work on. Something very obscure.
They're still used. So
yeah, all over the place.
You say
everywhere.
You can spell AS400 in financials, healthcare. Find the book. Oh,
still, my boss and I always said it was the most rock solid server we had ever seen. That thing had literal years of uptime.
Yes.
Craziness.
Exactly.
Back to malicious code. Logic bombs. Book also mentions hoaxes. We've probably all seen those pop-up websites. Makes your browser full screen, says you're infected.
Yep.
Hoax can be something like that, trying to get you to download the actual virus, the actual payload, or just something designed to misdirect or waste the time of your security staff.
Yes. And for those who are following along, be aware of links in public group chats.
Yeah,
I
well,
just put one on the YouTube.
we even had a discussion at work the other day, unsubscribe links in emails. If you're getting spam or some kind of malicious email that makes it through, if you don't trust the other links, why do you trust the unsubscribe link? Certainly the Can Spam Act says it needs to be there, but that doesn't mean it needs to work properly or take you to the right place.
Well, and that's if they're in the US jurisdiction,
Oh,
which may
fair
not. So
point.
this actually was a LinkedIn chat I had this week. Someone did a poll. Do you unsubscribe or do you just delete or mark it, for automatic blocking through your email provider? And sometimes depends on that source. Try to avoid too many it depends. If it's a source I'm familiar with, but how many Gmail emails do you get? And they're like, reply with unsubscribe. I'm like, no, because that's showing I'm alive. Going to the black hole. Yes. So
Trojan
be aware
horses,
of it. Yep, Trojan horse.
something that looks good, might
Yep.
be good, but it might have something else inside of it. I think the example they use, like if your old school pirate keygen or some kind of activator application might work, but it's probably going to carry a malicious payload with it as well. Even something benign, browser plugins, stuff like that, be on the lookout for. We talked about worms, we talked about viruses.
So what about this Stuxnet thing? That was like so 2010 Stuxnet. We wouldn't want to take down Iranian nuclear capabilities. Bringing it back to modern day. So who wrote Stuxnet? Does anyone know? So if you want
I
to
don't know
learn
off the top of my
more,
head.
reportedly it was supposedly Israelis and the US, but I can neither confirm nor deny that fact. So if you want to learn more about it, a top book about it is called Countdown to Zero Day. So Jake, what's a 0 day? Is it a 0 day or an O day?
I say 0 day. I don't know if you're trying to trick me with O day.
I've heard a phrase both ways.
Oh, okay. Just something a vulnerability we don't know about yet, or one that's not in any of these databases. We talked about the like advanced persistent threats. I think the book even mentions that sometimes somebody knows about it, right? Not the right people, not the people making the database, and then they are able to trade it for money. So way into, if you're
they're bought and sold on the dark web.
Yeah.
So yes, it had at least 3 0 days, Stuxnet did. And basically it was sneaker net. So it was on a USB drive. They were able to convince a nuclear engineer in Iran to take it from an internet-facing computer and put it onto their centrifuges, causing them to spin out of control and self-destruct. So, but it was technically a worm because it automatically propagated through the operational technology systems, PLCs they had there. So, and yes, it could be big money. Yeah, you can go and research your own on the dark web. Again, this is some of the fun stuff of cybersecurity.
Yeah. Book also mentions spyware and adware. Spyware is just something that might monitor your actions, take screenshots, keyloggers, things like that would fall in that category. Adware, software that shows you ads, right? Somebody's making money off the ads. Might correlate together. But yeah, just malicious software to show you pop-ups or advertisements or even hoaxes to get you to execute a payload potentially.
I may have mentioned this previously. Do any of y'all use NoScript? Are you familiar with NoScript? It's a browser add-on. Now I gotta
Just
put it out.
disabling JavaScript?
NoScript.net. No, it's a browser add-on that stops you from, it stops your web browser from accessing any supplemental websites. I use it with Firefox. It's also available on Chrome. Let me put it in chat. If you have not played with it, do not give it to your mom because it breaks the internet. I use it as often just as an example of all of the trackers on a website. Like I'll go to a news site, let's just say CNN, and it stops all of the ads on CNN because that's how they make money. But you're able to see when you go to CNN.com, you're actually going to 30 other resources, all of the different trackers, because that's how CNN is now making money by seeing what news you read and tracking you. And this is actually how Google has been making money for a lot of years because Google tracking is on most websites.
I'm a big
So
fan of Privacy Badger. Have you heard of that
yeah,
one for Firefox? Yeah, that's my
that's another
daily
really
driver.
good one. Someone put that one in chat. So how do you
And
stop browser add-ons? Don't install them. Yeah, or Brave. Someone tried putting Brave browser is known for higher levels of privacy and security. I'll often switch in between. But yeah, if you have not played with NoScript, it's really fun. Again, breaks the internet, but really shows you. And I use it as in demos quite often with folks when they're like, "Oh, no one's tracking me." Yeah, all about spyware, adware.
Book also mentions ransomware. I'm sure you've all heard of this news, or somebody, you probably know somebody that's been personally affected by it. Software that comes in, somehow encrypts your files, locks you out of your information systems, what have you, demands money to release it. Big worry is, well, one, paying might be illegal, right? And if they are nefarious enough to infect your systems, what makes you think they're going to give you the decryption key? Or what makes you think they're going to restore your systems to normal? What makes you think they're not going to leave some kind of APT or persistent threat there?
I can speak to the fact that paying may be illegal. There are cases that have been worked where insurance companies are like, hey, just go and you should just pay this, and then only come to find out that if the company would have paid, it would have against the law and they would have faced prosecution for it because they would have then been supporting terrorism at that point. So make sure that if you guys do ever come across ransomware, that if you guys even think about paying, which you shouldn't, that's where your backups and such come into play in your disaster recovery plans. But make sure if that's what someone's going to choose to do, that you can actually do that, and that's not going to get you in legal trouble.
Is that
How
up
does
to like
that
a
work with
security?
medical care? I'm just curious.
From what angle? Because it depends.
If they
Like,
choose to pay it because, they got patients that, people are going to lose their lives and they decide to pay it and they're on that sanction list. Do you have any idea? I'm just curious.
I don't have any personal firsthand experience in that one. I'm guessing that there are people out there that do that might be able to speak on that. But there's a lot of nuance and such to it. So, if it's going to be something where you've already have law enforcement involved, which if you're medical, you might already have it involved, you're not going to have that option because they're going to know what you're doing. And yeah, like Ron said, you should. They're going to know what you're doing. And if you go like, hey, we're going to pay it, they're going to be like, dude, you can't. Like, you legally can't. So,
Unless your CISO is also an attorney, I recommend that it's not the CISO's decision to pay or not to pay. That is the question. That's where it's a business decision. You get legal involved, inside counsel, outside counsel. This is where you'll often bring in outside experts. You want to make sure this is something you practice for. Ransomware has been around for almost multiple decades at this point. So if it's not part of a standard tabletop, you find an executive, your chief marketing officer has computer just got a big red screen on it that says you are locked and you need to pay 1 Bitcoin to unlock it. What do you do?
Panic.
Perfect. Yes, update your resume. That's step 2. Get the attorneys involved.
Step 3 is get out.
Make sure you have the
No, not really.
process. I've had that happen where I've been performing a security assessment for an organization and they got breached, and it was outside of my scope to help them with their breach. And they kept trying to pull me in. And I'm like, no, contact your insurance, contact your attorney. If you can show actual monetary loss, you should also contact your local FBI and law enforcement, particularly if it's outside of your state borders in the United States. I think every state has some type of, well, each state patrol, law enforcement, they may have some type of a cyber analysis center you can also turn to. Know who to call. Who are you going to call?
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, beforehand. Exactly. You could not say that, could you?
I couldn't. I'm sorry. I'm an 80s baby.
All good. All good. But have that list established beforehand, the relationships with law enforcement. CISA can also help you with it here in the United States. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in terms of persistence too, I mean, we talked about, getting the decryption key, but your backups might not be safe. Right? It could have been there for a while, and then, you immediately go to restore from your backups. Oops, immediately encrypted again, because the threat's been on your network for, who knows how long. Super scary stuff.
It is. It is. So I'm just reading through next topic.
What's your next topic?
going.
Malware prevention?
Yeah, and we've kind of talked a little bit about
Yeah.
it.
We talked about 0 days.
Yep.
Book just defines that as security flaws discovered by attackers that have not been thoroughly addressed by the security community.
Yep.
Right, so stuff that the greater populace doesn't know about. Book talks a little bit about platforms that are vulnerable to malware. By and large, most malware is for Windows. Recently,
Yeah,
I
almost
think,
anywhere.
right.
Yeah, Apple does get viruses. Just
And
saying, Mac OS.
as their market share increases, certainly the malicious attacks against them will also increase. I mentioned Android being more vulnerable because of sideloading. iPhones have sideloading now if you're fortunate enough to live in Europe. There is no platform invulnerable. Just depends who wants in and who's going to write it, right?
And often they're just doing it for mass production. Same idea with phishing. They can send out 2 billion email, and if they can get 0.001%, that could be valuable enough for them. So that's how they look at this, the economics associated with it. So yes, security is all about economics.
Yeah. We did touch on anti-malware software a good bit. We talked about signature-based detection and, how the polymorphic viruses can, get around that. We also talked about heuristics, looking at the whole picture, looking at what's being accessed, how it's being accessed, what's going on. Look at the whole picture, not just the signature or the executable file name, what have you.
Then the book goes into integrity monitoring. So what is the most famous tool for integrity monitoring in the world of cybersecurity?
You thinking like hashing or an MD5 or something, or?
Yeah. There's a tool that's been around forever, wrote by Gene Kim, called Tripwire. And they're their own organization now, and now there are other similar ones. But basically, what they did, and they first created it as a security tool where you could see what was changed within an application, within a system, because it would basically create a hash value for every file within a system. So every part of the operating system, and anytime something changed, it could then look at the hash value, do a quick comparison, and then raise an alert based on that. So it's, again, been around for a long time, but you can create your own really simply and easily. And this ties back to why you needed to pay attention during the chapter on encryption and hashing. You see this all the time when you're downloading an application, they'll provide it the hash value. So this way you can confirm the integrity. of it. So its book doesn't really, only covers it in one paragraph, but it's been around for a very long time now, built into a lot of products.
Yeah, the book kind of goes into a little more detail too with the heuristics. You'll probably have questions on how they break it out with user and entity behavior analytics, paying specific attention to user activity on endpoints, building a profile on each individual's normal activity and looking for things, not in line with that. They also specifically define like EDR versus a traditional antivirus, analyzing endpoint memory, file system, network activity, potentially isolating a device, different threat sources, and other incident response mechanisms, maybe alerting or integration with other business units as well.
Like someone put in tying it into a SIM.
Right.
EDR and SIM tend to be separate, but we're seeing a lot of them combined now. This will actually get back to conversation we had a long time ago, John, about data lakes. Having your logging, alerting, monitoring strategy in place for the organization is critical for this. Can you go back and recreate events? Is really it, the who, what, why, when, where, how. This ties directly into incident response. So many organizations will use an EDR tool like a SIM or SIM like EDR, when in reality, they just need to store all of that data. And then in the case of an incident, being able to pull it back. You don't necessarily need real-time alerts on everything happening. So just something to think about. Many organizations struggle with that, and that's associated here with vulnerability and attacks, understanding, different types of attacks.
Any other questions or comments about maybe malicious code before we move into the application attacks part of the chapter?
Let me see in chat. I don't see any. So someone put in chat here, integrity monitoring for logs. Ooh, yes, you want to make sure no one can, this is why you have a separate log system. You can store both locally and have that centralized repository, whether you're using something like LogLogic or Splunk. This way you can maintain the integrity of those logs. And that system, yes, could be using file integrity monitoring to make sure no one is tampering with those logs, because that is a known type of an attack, where if I can get in and disrupt the logging, hide my tracks. It's almost tied back to that old idea of a rootkit. Good question. I think we should talk about different types of vulnerability. So we mentioned earlier SQL injection attacks. So what are different type of injection vulnerabilities, Jake?
Certainly SQL, where you're trying to get data out of the database that you shouldn't have access to or shouldn't be able to see. Let me scroll over there. SQL injection.
So I'm gonna, while you're finding this, I'm gonna put this in chat. It's been around for a long time. So testfire.net. If you want a place to play and try out these attacks without getting in trouble, you can go to testfire.net. It's called Alturo Mutual. It's a fabricated credit union that they just established as a safe playground for folks to learn, is really it. So you can try out buffer overflow attacks, try out a different type of injection, understanding the difference between reflected and stored cross-site scripting. So I love trying out cross-site scripting because that usually is an indicator of more vulnerabilities. I actually have a really simple test for cross-site scripting. And I don't know, do we have anyone who knows HTML here?
Very little.
So what does the plain text tag do?
It's a trick question.
It just puts everything in plain text. So my attack is you use a tick greater than, less than, the word plain text greater than. Try it out here on the Altura Mutual site, and you'll see it just puts the website in plain text, shows you the base HTML, which, by the way, you can also look at by just using F12 or looking at view source. So it's really nothing malicious, but it tells me that that site is vulnerable to at least a reflected. So reflected meaning it just reflects it back to the user's browser, as opposed to stored meaning it's saving it some way. So reflected is usually not very harmful. However, it often indicates that they are not scrubbing their input, as we talked about earlier. So it's a very simple hack, if you will, I use just to check for cross-site scripted, which usually means other types, of potential forgery attacks.
Back to injection. So we talked about SQL trying to get information out. Might be as simple as just adding where 1 equals 1, or editing the query in some way, appending something. There's also code injection or command injection attacks and code-based injection. Command, instead of the SQL query, perhaps the website is hopefully not running some kind of code on a local server. Maybe at the terminal or something for authentication, just trying to get it to run something it wasn't designed to. Code injection, I think they just kind of define a little more broadly as any malformed input that's resulting in code being executed that shouldn't be. Anything else you wanted to add to injections, Rob?
No, I think again, play around with it for those who are learning this. Someone put in chat with the name of FedEx, which sounds suspicious, but mentioning Port Swigger. Yes, there's lots of free tools. You can try out Burp Suite. They have a free version. They actually have a very robust paid-for version. If you're going to practice on this, though, practice on your own stuff, spin up your own web server, backend database. It's called a LAMP server, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and Python. So a LAMP server.
HP.
Anyway, thank you. And to practice.
Yeah, and that's I feel like we're saying in every one of these, check this out, learn a little bit. But the reality is, the more you know, the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you understand how something could be exploited, how it could be insecure. A lot of this chapter, especially the second half, talks about web development. Great place to start. I'm looking at the page on insecure direct object references. If you're looking, great example is you're looking at an invoice and your invoice ID is 1800. Can you just go in the URL and change 1800 to 1801 or 1900? How many invoices can you see? I just pulled up the fire test, or the test fire page that Ron was talking about. In these forms, look at the URL, type some stuff in there, see what happens. Right, you can get around more than you think that way when stuff's not secured properly.
Can I share a pet peeve real quick, and then I'm going to need to jump. When you know how we like to share URLs. I found this really cool website. Look in the URL, look for the question mark and what's to the right of it. Often there's a lot of additional information just about who is accessing that website, how you are accessing it. I see this all the time with LinkedIn. They'll share a LinkedIn post and it'll tell me what operating system you're using, the platforms you are using. We don't realize we're leaking all of this data through just sharing of URLs. So next time you're sharing a URL, look for the question mark and determine, do I really need to share all of that additional information about myself? Amazing how much we accidentally leak and how low tech it is.
Yeah. In the same vein, book also talks about directory traversal, locally and especially on the website. For those of us that have ever used Linux, you can get back a directory with 2 periods, ... What happens if you type that in your web browser? Can you go back? Can you get to the passwords file? Can you look at logs? Hopefully not, but but maybe. Most things are the result of misconfiguration, I'd like to think, but
But there's a lot of legacy systems out there where it still works. I mean,
right.
we've been using those types of attacks for many decades. Sometimes they still work. So that's why they still bring it up in the book, is that it still works.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the LAMP stack too. Another thing to add to the infinite list of things to learn, server side versus client side web languages. We talked about PHP, a server side language. Book also talks about like file inclusion and other things, tricking, using the browser, using a malformed URL to trick the server to run malicious code for the server side languages. Right.
Perfect. Well, y'all, I got to jump, late for dinner. As always, good chatting with you. For everyone else, please hang out, keep learning, and I hope to see y'all next week.
Cool.
Ron.
Thanks,
Later,
Ron.
Ron.
So with that, I know that we're kind of getting towards the end here of the chapter. Anything else that jumped out at you that you wanted to touch on? If
Yeah.
not,
Just maybe a couple more things to wrap up on the second half of this chapter. A lot of these attacks that we're talking about, the directory traversal, insecure object references, validate your inputs. If you're correctly parameterizing, validating your input, these attacks shouldn't work, right? What else? They talk about web application firewalls in here a little bit too. Something that stands in the way of the web application. Another layer of security against these potentially malformed URLs, data exfiltration, making sure you're not able to inject your own malicious code. Code signing kind of goes hand in hand with like the hash-based, using some kind of PKI, private key infrastructure, or certificate to validate that the code that you're sending out correctly matches everything, has not been tampered with, has not been modified. And we also talked about library inclusion. Kind of goes hand in hand with the vibe coding a lot. A lot of times AI will include libraries that are superfluous, or all kinds of things that are unneeded that could be potential exploits. I think that's about it. You want to do some questions?
yep, I got you covered. I've got a few that I created. Now, let me see this over here. So I've not read through these ones, so we'll see if they're as good as they were last week or not. So, Evan, are you still there with us, man? Maybe not.
I am still here.
Okay, cool.
I was listening and coding because you guys are talking about software development.
Gotcha. All right, let's see.
Great conversation, by the way. It's cool listening.
All right, can you guys see that? Is it maybe coming up?
I can now.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So, question 1, financial application implements a custom serialization mechanism for object transfer. The penetration test reveals a flaw where attackers can inject serialized data to trigger unexpected behavior, which secure design principle is most likely violated. We have fail securely, defense in depth, do not trust user input, or keep security simple. So, this is quite literally what we just talked about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Probably C, do not trust user input.
I concur with Jacob.
concur. You guys would be correct. Hold on before I say that. Let me make sure. Let me look at the information I've got.
I have a feeling like I'm in pretty good shape if I just agree with what Jacob.
And you would be correct because it is C. All right. Number
Yeah.
2, the developer embeds hard-coded credentials and application source code stored in the public
No.
Git repository. Well, yeah, they shouldn't be doing that, but what is the primary risk? Unauthorized code modification, credential reuse across internal systems, or unauthorized access to systems and data, or violation of version control best practices.
Or E, dumb.
Yeah, well, we can't quite say that. I mean, if you're taking the test and you say like, hey, this is stupid, why would we even do this? I don't think that they give you credit for that. In fact, they might shut
Oh,
you down for complaining about it
fine.
in the testing center because they don't want you doing that. They want you to be quiet.
Quiet. I'm so good at that.
This is a good question too. I think two answers that probably jump out to people: B, credential reuse across internal systems, and C, unauthorized access to systems and data. I think the most correct here would be unauthorized access to systems and data. Not necessarily, I don't like that criterion of internal systems. I
Let's
also
see.
want to
Yeah.
mention, in terms of hard-coded credentials and things, the book even mentions comments in the code, potentially in a public repository, explaining how logic works, explaining, some just information that the public shouldn't have that could potentially lead to an exploit.
Mhm.
You're correct, it is C.
It's true.
And Pat in chat, yeah, ChatGPT is yet again on another C bender here. So, but the first two
Bender.
being both C. Yep. All right. Number 3. Which of the following best mitigates the risk of a SQL injection attack in a web application? Input validation via regex, escaping user inputs before executing queries, using stored procedures without parameters, or implementing parameterized queries. So I'm going to say you can't depend on ChatGPT to always have the answer C on this one.
It's not C on this one.
No,
For damn sure.
again, two that are kind of right. A, inputting validation via regex. That might be part of it, right? But you're not going to parameterize or strip anything that could potentially be malicious through regex. So I'm going to go with D, implementing parameterized queries.
Any objections? All right,
What was
these are
A again?
A
Input
is
Okay.
validation via regex.
Yep.
Oh. I don't know. I like A, but I would go with D too.
D is what at least ChatGPT thinks is correct. All right.
But I should go with it.
Question 4. A developer tests a feature in production using known credentials and inadvertently logs these in plain text within application logs. Which of the following secure coding practices was most violated? So because I screwed it up, a developer tests a feature in production using known credentials, inadvertently logs these in plain text within application logs. So which of the following secure coding practices most violated? Avoiding logging user activity, least privilege, do not store secrets in plain text, or output encoding.
I think this is another trick question. My gut wants to say output encoding for this one, but I think it might be C, do not store secrets in plain text. They're talking about code and output potentially. And because it's
Well, and
ChatGPT, and I'm assuming the answer is C.
the creds were in the logs,
Yep. That's what they're saying.
right? And what was A?
Avoid logging user activity.
Yeah. Well,
Which,
user activity. I
yeah,
want
you
user
want,
activity, but I want
yeah, you
creds.
do. Least privilege has nothing here because it's a developer in testing. So you're left with C and D, which C is the correct answer. You guys probably going to say that, but that's what they're looking for on this one. So, which
Tough questions.
this is something that you see every once in a while where it does pop up that there is information like this that is logged in plain text logs. So you do have to be careful of this. All right. Number 5, an application uses client-side JavaScript to enforce input length restrictions. What is the primary security concern with this design? It consumes additional client-side resources. It may not be compatible with all browsers. It can be easily bypassed by attackers, or it impacts front-end performance.
This is a great question for what I briefly mentioned earlier, client-side versus server-side languages. So in a client-side language like PHP, you're never going to see the code. You're going to see the output. You're going to see what's rendered in your browser. JavaScript is a client-side language, so you can modify it in your browser with those developer tools that Ron was talking about. So I'm definitely going to go with C here, can be easily bypassed by attackers.
Sure.
Nice, you guys are correct.
ChatGPT strikes again.
Yep. How many people are just putting in C for the answers just because that's what it's pretty much always been so far? It's okay if you are, I'm just asking. Question 6, a web-based payroll application is vulnerable to CSRF. Which of the following controls is most effective at mitigating this vulnerability? Before I read the options for the answers, cross-site, what is CSRF?
Request
I was
forgery.
going to ask you. I'm looking it up in the book too.
I think it's request forgery, isn't it?
Thank you. So, and the reason why I want to point this out is because on the exam, they will write out those words for you. They will not abbreviate it like this, like it is on here. So our options are input validation, CAPTCHA, same site cookie attribute, or output encoding. So web-based payroll application is vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. Which of the following controls is most effective at mitigating this vulnerability? Input validation, CAPTCHA, same site cookie attribute, or output encoding?
Go with the C, same site cookie attribute.
Okay. I see a lot of A's over there in chat. Not C. And C.
Not C.
Thank you for well, that's Brian in chat says not C. Honestly, they say it is C. Is the answer that we're given.
Because you could create a forged cookie potentially.
Yep. Exactly that. So in here, it's you're not looking at the input, which is A. So you're looking at something else for this. Because it doesn't say anything about inputting. All right. Next up is a company receives reports of ransomware being delivered via macros in downloadable spreadsheets, which is the most effective defensive control to prevent this type of malicious code execution. Block outbound connections on port 445, enforce strong password policies, disable macro execution by default, and use antivirus with real-time scanning.
Oh, I think we know the answer to this one.
Oh, absolutely. It's got to be A, right? I mean, totally. Because that has everything to do with like spreadsheets is port 445, right? Totally.
Right, that's the Excel port.
Yeah, exactly, right? Totally. Right. So disable macro execution by default. So then this one, honestly, this is one of the things that when I was in IT, this is one of the first things I had worked on in disabling macros by default. And that's a long time ago. So this is something that still, it's crazy that you still need to do this, but I'm guessing that most people are doing that. All right. Question 8, which of the following SDLC practices provides the most effective way to identify security flaws early in the development lifecycle? Penetration testing, fuzz testing, threat modeling, or dynamic analysis?
Dynamic analysis.
I agree.
Dynamic analysis. You sure?
Or fuzz testing?
It's either that or threat modeling.
It's one of the four.
Good answer.
It would be threat modeling. Because you're going to be doing
C
that.
strikes again.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and this is, you want it early in the development cycle where generally dynamic analysis is when you've already been developing and building that out. All right, question 9. Which of the following best mitigates risk from third-party software dependencies? Performing fuzz testing on third-party modules, using a software composition analysis tool, manually reviewing license agreements, or implementing unit tests for every dependency. So I'm going to throw it out there right now. I can tell you without even looking at the answer that C is not the answer on this one. So we've got, we want to mitigate risk from third-party software dependencies.
Well, I'm thinking like B, using a software composition analysis tool. That's good for inventorying, but you're not really mitigating risk there. You're just enumerating your risk, right? Performing fuzz testing on third-party modules or implementing unit tests. Fuzz testing feels a little too specific. So I'm going to go with D, implementing unit tests for every dependency.
Gotcha. So they're calling out B on this one. So
Really?
and yeah, and so I'll read you the exact explanation. So SCA tools help identify known vulnerabilities in third-party libraries and monitor for new risks. So I didn't was
Fair enough.
where's software composition analysis in the book? I don't remember seeing it, but
I don't recall seeing much about it either.
gotcha.
I also don't recall any questions on it in the exam, but take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. All right. An attacker uploads JPEG file embedded with PHP code into a photo sharing website. The server executes the script when the file is accessed. What type of vulnerability does this best represent? Remote file inclusion, file path transversal, improper input validation, unrestricted file upload.
Well, it's definitely a few. It is, I guess, potentially an unrestricted file upload. It also is potentially an improper input validation if you're able to upload the picture that contains the script. But I think the best option here is remote file inclusion, since the script is being executed on the remote server.
Gotcha. Is there anybody else? Concur, not concur?
Not being a programmer, I was going to go with C.
Gotcha. Was that because of ChatGPT, or is that just because the answer you
No, because it makes sense to me that there was improper input validation. You know, this code is embedded into the JPEG file.
Gotcha.
To me, it made sense. But
all right. So this is, you guys are gonna probably smack your foreheads on this one. It is the unrestricted file upload. So it's sort of the most prominent one. Although I will say that when I've done practice tests before, even fairly recently, when I read questions, I read way too much into them and be like, are they trying to get at something else here? Where in this case, it wasn't. It was straightforward. What they were looking for was that. So cool. And what I'll do is for those of you guys who are interested, like last week, I will post these questions in Discord tomorrow so that you guys can look at these, or and I'll have the answers with the explanations there as well. So now, with that, if you guys have any questions based off this information, throw them out there. I'm going to wrap us up here. So as I mentioned before, next week we will start the more exam preparation part of the program. So we're going to be talking about the exam itself, what to look out for, experiences and such. I'll probably recount mine. I'll probably have you guys recount your experiences of what you guys went through, even like leading up to the exam. What did you guys do? How did you guys study? Was there anything special that helped you guys? And then just knowing about the exam itself. We will also be doing practice test questions using CSecure. So we will not be using ChatGPT on those ones. We'll be using, to me, better examples of those of questions to go through, and we'll talk about the process, and we'll really pick apart the questions generally when we do that over those next two sessions. So if you guys have any questions, throw them out here now or throw them out in Discord. John, Jacob, Evan, thank you guys very much for your time today. It is appreciated. Yeah, I'll see you guys in Discord. If not there, then I'll see you guys next week.
All right.
thanks, everyone.
Great job, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next week.
And then there were only two.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Have a good night, man.